and you've got something happening outside your educational system that will give your kids an incentive to do more in math and science starting in younger grades, because those jobs are going to be there. Even truck driving jobs are going to be paying well. So somehow you've got to think about what you have in your system that will move the kids, more of them, maybe not all of them, but as many as possible. That was all we tried to do in Massachusetts. Boost everybody from wherever they are, but all kids have to go forward. And that was what we were accomplishing. All demographic groups were moving forward. We weren't closing the gaps because everybody's moving up. You can't do the two things simultaneously. You do one or the other. And we wanted, and we were supported by schools that wanted everybody moving upward. There's still a ways to go. We still aren't that competitive. We have, yes, averages that are high, but when we compare our high achievers in Massachusetts with the percentage of high achievers in Southeast Asian countries, they have far more high achievers in those countries than we have in Massachusetts, so we know we still have a ways to go there. So West Virginia has to think about not only a set of standards that gives incentive for getting more kids into STEM, but also alternative curricula at the high school level. As I was telling other people, one of the great gems of the system we have that turned out, and it was a surprise to a lot of people, was the 30 regional vocational technical high schools that we had that have now developed waiting lists for the most part, because kids choose to go to them from 9 to 12. They're 9 to 12 vocational technical schools. 10% of the high school population approximately goes to them. But they train kids for robotics, pre-engineering or engineering programs, welding, whatever it is. Local industries support, and if you have local gas and oil industries coming into the state, I would make them support those kinds of training programs as a quid pro quo. That's what you get from them if they're going to be in your state doing something, and have your kids choose the kind of high school curriculum they want. Let me quickly just speak about the testing system. One of the charges against Common Core is excessive testing. I don't know if it will be any more tests than what you've had under No Child Left Behind, but they're going to be longer. And some of the estimates I've seen, we don't know yet because the tests aren't going to be given until next year, but some of the estimates are 8 to 10 hours of testing every year, from 3 to 8. No other country in the world does that. No other country in the world would expect kids to go year after year with that much time taking tests. They will give a test maybe at the end of grade 8. They give high school exit tests, and they have matriculation tests for going into the university. It's the end of the system, but they don't have tests at every single grade level. Your teachers should be able to make up teacher tests and give tests based on what they've taught. And then you develop what I have seen them do in some other countries that I've been in. You have audits from inspectors so that you make sure that whatever the grading system is in one school is similar to the grading system in the other. But to expose kids and impose that much time on testing is an abuse of the children and does not serve good educational purposes. The teacher education issue requires a whole lot more than I can say in a few minutes. But what we tried to do in Massachusetts, I tried to do, was raise the academic bar for what teachers had to know. Didn't matter whether it was elementary or high school or middle school. They had to know more about the subject they taught. Why? Because all the research pointed to one conclusion. The only effective characteristic we know of an effective teacher is knowledge of the subject they teach. That's common sense. You cannot teach math if you do not know math. You can have all the pedagogical coursework in the world, but if you don't know math, you cannot teach it well. So there has to be a way to gradually raise the academic bar, particularly for your K-8 teachers, which is where we saw the greatest weaknesses. Most elementary teachers everywhere don't like teaching math, they don't like teaching science, they don't like teaching history, and they may not even teach reading well because they've been mistaught how to teach reading in their own schools of education. That was one of the issues I went to graduate school for. So they need the kind of upgrading that could be done in every state in many ways, and as I say, that's a subject for a different time. And I think I've got to stop now.
I hate to bug a Harvard-educated
no, I talked
our special guest. No, I want you to leave time for some questions. If you need, if you can wrap.
I will. That was the final point I was making.
Okay.
So, no, that was it. I wanted to just make the point that the teachers need to be looked at when you develop stronger standards for your state. Go back to an early point, you need teachers who can teach to first-class standards. And then I'll take whatever questions.
Let's give Dr. Stotsky a round. I will mention to you that over the next 2.5 days, Dr. Stotsky is meeting with a number of different education officials, including WVU President Dr. Gee, legislators. If you have time while you're here, the Legislative Interim Committee meetings are going on. We've set open tomorrow and mostly tomorrow in the afternoon. Please get a hold of me or Angie or Senator Boley so that we can fit you in if you have more questions. This is a very important topic, and really trying to. I watched you all. Nobody got fidgety, and I know you want more, and I know you want to ask more. But we want to try to pick out a couple of groups who we know are represented here to see if you have questions. Is there someone from homeschools? Anybody from homeschools would like to ask a question?
Sure. My name is Kate Hayne. I direct the Classical Conversations group.
Please mention your name again and where you're from.
My name is Kate Hayne. I direct a Classical Conversations homeschool community in Morgantown. And my question would be, does the adoption of Common Core and the subsequent testing that will require threaten the right to choose homeschooling in the long run?
So far as we understand it, and we've gotten that question from a lot of homeschoolers, it doesn't look like homeschoolers, depending on the laws of each state, which can vary, are going to be affected at all until maybe high school end, when they have to think about college tests, the admission tests. They're all being aligned down to Common Core. And if a student needs to take a Common Core-based test, which requires them to have taken a curriculum leading to the test, then the homeschooler is going to have to think about what to do at that point. Unless homeschoolers beforehand start talking to college officials about getting rid of these college admission tests, going to essays, going to personal interviews. But if you're going to have to take a test that has been aligned to Common Core in order to get into a college, or if the college is told by the USDE, no Pell Grants go to this college unless you admit only students who have passed a Common Core test, we don't know what, saber rattling will take place.
A follow-up question for homeschool? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Roger Sherman, Christian Home Educators of West Virginia. One of the issues that we face as homeschoolers is a requirement in West Virginia, which is somewhat unique. in that students either have to be tested annually by, under a nationally normed standardized test or submit to a portfolio standard. If all of the test writers are focused on Common Core, then will there be a nationally normed standardized test that homeschoolers who haven't followed Common Core could take in order to meet the West Virginia law?
At this point, it's not clear that there will be. I've been told, but I haven't verified it, that the ITBS, the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, may have its older version available as well as a Common Core aligned version. But that has to be checked with the companies themselves, because this could change from month to month, week to week.
Okay, we'd like to,
Mike?
yes?
I think Andy has a
Stand
comment.
up.
I was just going to say, my understanding, Sandra, when we were talking about it, is that they still do have the old version of Iowa and the Common Core version of Iowa, so hopefully.
Right now, okay, good.
Okay, let's move and we'll come back. I know there are a lot of teachers here. Are there any teachers that would have a question that you'd like to ask? Teachers, educators? Yes.
Yeah, I taught physics for 40 years, and been a lot of changes, and there haven't been very many good ones. And what you're saying aligns with Charlotte Iserby, who wrote The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, and what she found, my question to you is, how could you mess up this bad by accident?
That's a rhetorical question.
I mean, what do you think is pushing all this?
You follow the money. We really do not know. All we know is what is officially told by the Gates Foundation and the organizations that sponsored these standards. They wanted to equalize academic expectations across states. They wanted to make us more competitive with other countries. They wanted to make it easier for all those students who move from one state to another. That's less than 2% of the population. We don't know what the real reasons are. We only know the talking points.
I mean, it seems to me Bill Gates has all the money he needs.
It isn't.
Are there other teachers? Okay, let me move in another direction here, another constituency group. School board members. I know we have at least one school board president here. Raise your hands. How many school board members do we have in the room? 2? Okay. Questions from school board members. Bonnie, do you have anything that you'd like to ask? Stand up, please, and introduce yourself and where you're from.
I'm Bonnie Hentorn from Tyler County, the president of Tyler County Board of Education. Could you go into the copyright issues with the standards? You mentioned during your talk that if you wanted, you could add all these extra classes. Is that really possible?
It was suggested in some documents early on that if states wanted more than what was in Common Core, they could add up to 15% more. They couldn't change anything in the Common Core standards. That's verbatim, and that is what the copyright says. When you go to the home page, you'll see the whole copyright. Now, they weren't going to monitor that 15%. Whatever a state said was 15% didn't matter to them. Why? Because it's not going to be tested. The test for Common Core will be based only on what is in Common Core. So if a state adds, as in Massachusetts in math, they added a few more math standards to strengthen and get it back closer to what we had, but that's not going to be tested by Common Core. So if a state wants to add and pay for its own testing, it can do that, but otherwise it may be just a futile gesture, because what incentive would a teacher have to teach to something extra that not only will not be tested, but they will not be held accountable for?
Ma'am, other school board member, you have any questions? Thank you for coming, both of you, very much.
Can I make,
Yeah.
I wanted to make one more point
Stand up.
about the bill that we've designed in Ohio too, because some people ask this question about the assessments. there were assessments associated with the standards that Massachusetts had that hopefully we'll be able to avail ourselves of those, which would be another expense that would be saved. So people said, what are you going to do with the test if you switch your standards? So that's one other thing, if you're considering having that, that's a nice bonus.
We have released test items by law. It was a statute, fortunately. So for every year that we had state tests, there's had to be a release of all the items that were used for every test at every grade level, made available up until the present. So those are free too. I mean, anyone can download whatever is there, because anything that a State Department of Ed puts out is not copyrightable. It's public tax dollars that paid for it.
Okay, I'd like to move, yes?
What was the modification that you're suggesting in Massachusetts? What was that called so that we could pull it up to try to at least use that in deciding legislation here?
For ELA, what the department and the board both agreed upon after it adopted Common Core was to adopt the guiding principles that had been in the earlier documents and the two appendices, A and B, which I won't go into details about, but they were recommended authors, and our English teachers liked those two appendices. They guided state assessment. Now, they will not be used to guide Common Core, and if Massachusetts has no more state assessments in another year, I don't know what they will guide except classroom curricula, but the English teachers in Massachusetts wanted these recommended authors. English teachers in Massachusetts, like everywhere else, are ornery creatures. They have their own likes and dislikes, and they would never agree on a list of titles, but they will agree on a list of important authors for our civic and literary heritage. So that appendix we have, and they're happy with it because they can choose which Hawthorne, which Melville. There's nothing that says it's got to be Moby Dick or...
But there was no bill like they have in Ohio.
No bill, because this was simply something a state board could adopt to add on.
Okay, let's move on. I know there are some administrators, academic folks from the college level that are here. Any questions or concerns you'd like to ask that may benefit all of us? Anybody? Yes, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Craig Ratton from West Virginia University at Parkersburg. My question has to do with how will this affect things like the ACT and SAT testing?
Well, so far as we know, and David Coleman, who's now president of the College Board, has already said, and they're aligning the SATs down to the level of the college readiness standards. It makes it not a predictive test for college anymore. It's now going to be a kind of achievement test. So it changes the whole nature of the test. ACT has been ambivalent, but it looks like they've also aligned their test down to the level of the Common Core standards. So it removes them from being predictive tests for college level ability. What good they're going to be ultimately, I don't know.
Great question. Good questions. Anybody else at the college level? Okay, we have a number of legislators who are here, who are on education committees, or legislators who are serving now. Are there any questions that you all have? Please, no speeches, but good questions from what you've heard or something you'd like to have clarified. Any legislator?
I've been going back and forth.
Please introduce yourself.
Mike Folk, Berkeley County. I've been going back and forth actually on social media with some people that basically claim that the people that sit on this Common Core Writing Standards Committee are educators. Do you have a list of those? I mean, that's what I need. I need access to that. I'm pretty good at doing research, but if you have a list of those with those people's backgrounds, I'd be greatly appreciated if you could give it to me.
They're listed up there on the Common Core site somewhere, but I can certainly arrange to send them to you. They listed all the people on the earlier Standards Development Committee, as I say, most of them connected to the testing industry, the writers and their bios who wrote the standards in both English and math, and then the members of the Validation Committee. That's all available. If
Senator?
you leave me an email, I'll send that to you.
Thank you, Dr. Stotsky, for an informative presentation. I'm Senator Seipel from Preston County, and I don't serve on education. However, I would like to ask, in West Virginia, the Common Core standards were adopted by an executive order, basically the state entering into a contract with the signature of the governor and the superintendent of schools. Legislatively, is there, am I incorrect about that?
The State Board of Education.
State Board of
adopted
Education,
that.
yes.
They signed the memorandum of understanding with the SBAC.
My point being that it was without legislative action.
That's right.
Is there an avenue that the legislature can take in order to buffer that or unwind this without breaking the contract and getting into legal ramifications?
That I can't on my own answer, because a lawyer or a legal counsel would have to look at the actual contract and figure out how you could pass a bill as a legislature to undo an action of the state board, if that's where the action is. Perhaps, Andy, you can say more
Well, I
on
mean, the only
that.
thing that I would say is that when I introduced my first bill, they said this is unconstitutional, how can you do this? But we're working with the Legislative Service Commission to do this. And also, we know that people have gotten out of the park, the testing. You're in Smarter Balance, so you can get out of that. But, you know, the other people have said to me, we break contracts all the time, you know. I don't know if that, you know, I'm not sure if I could say that about West Virginia, but I think you need to have lawyers, because, you know, lawyers constructed this. Lawyers can deconstruct this, I would assume, with the proper legislation. Certainly that's what we're hoping to do in Ohio. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Legislators?
Oh,
Yes?
we have the policy analyst here from the House, the council. Would he comment on any of that?
I think he had to leave early, didn't he? David, are you still here?
They had to go to another reception. I do
Is there-
have a question, if I,
Yes,
for Dr.
please.
Stotsky. I think there's people probably in this audience that does not know what STEM is. Would you just tell them what STEM is?
STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. That whole area that basically requires mathematics
And what she's saying
development.
for your, you know, is that there is no pathway with Common Core. You get to the 12th grade, you're not ready to go on to STEM, right?
You're not ready for a calculus course, which might be the freshman course in an engineering or science major or economics major, finance major. All of these majors for 4 years have required beginning with an advanced math and science course. And the topics that need to be addressed, according to Professor Milgram, now I am repeating what a mathematician told me, are not there for all the trigonometry and pre-calculus course topics that should be there. I cannot tell you, as I said, I'm English reading, and it's only people who know those areas who know what topics today need to be there in order to get to a calculus course by senior year, if not by freshman year, because as I found out in Massachusetts, 4 of our 12 engineering colleges require kids to have had calculus in high school before they even get to college. So you have to have your higher ed people address this issue, and I certainly couldn't speak to your
Okay.
higher ed requirements.
Let me go to last few questions here to some parents. I know there are a lot of parents here. Parents with questions that we could, please introduce, stand up and introduce yourself.
My name is Tom Zawatsky. I'm part of a group in Wood County that is really trying to affect issues that are very much related to Common Core state standards by talking to some decision makers in our county. And one of the questions I had, which you have already answered partially, was how do you counter an objection to Common Core state standards saying that we need to be able to provide for a student who learns here, he needs to be able to be in a comfortable place when he moves to another state. You've already addressed that partially by saying that's only 2% of the problem.
Less.
Could
Yeah.
you elaborate on the best way to argue that aside from that 2% issue?
Why are you educating students who may or may not move away? I mean,
A point well made. Now, the next step that I would probably want to pursue is provide an alternative to the Common Core state standards as you've outlined with the Massachusetts pre-2009. I would like either, you can point us in the right direction to go, how do we find more specific information to make it something that's easy to relay to an interested teacher or administrator so that they can pursue it?
Bill.
Yeah.
I would point the finger to the bill in Ohio, which was really worked on that section to indicate some specifics.
I want to make one other point, and I think, we started out with what was House Bill 237, and it was an imperfect bill. We had a substitute bill that addressed some of the data mining issues, and we haven't really spent any time on data issues here, but one of the things you need to know is when the state signed the memorandum of understanding with Smarter Balance for the PARC, the Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness for College and Career, they agreed to give data to those, and they agreed to modify their state laws to give those companies whatever data they wanted. Once they have that data, and there's a series of data points, as we know, they can ask, do you have guns in your home? Does your dad treat your mom bad? Do you smoke? What political party? All this stuff. They can ask a whole array of questions that a kid sitting in front of a computer says, okay, I guess I got to answer this. And then they can give those to whomever they authorize. So that's one of those things that my bill addressed. You'll hear occasionally, well, we got FERPA, Federal Privacy Law. That law was gutted administratively by the Department of Education, so that's not protected.
Okay, folks, I don't want to cut you off, but listen, there's going to be plenty of time right after this for you to have personal conversations with these folks. Dr. Stotsky is going to be here for a couple of hours if we need to afterwards. Parents with questions. Anybody else over here before we get to, yes, right here. Introduce yourself, please.
Ken Winky from Harrison County, retired federal agent, my wife also. 25, 26 years in law enforcement and criminal investigations. In reading all this, I have 3 sons that have gone through the public school system and scored 30s on the ACTs, have taken Calc A, B, B, C, and scored 5s in the public school system. And I'm proud that they can compete against kids in college that have gone to Lindsley, have gone to the Catholic schools throughout the nation, private schools throughout the nation, boarding schools. I have 2 remaining kids. And I looked and I read, and I was told that the legislators, the schools are doing this and the state's doing this because of legislative law, just to let you know here tonight. I found a loophole. Our legislators in the state of West Virginia have an online virtual school. It was set up because of distance inequalities in the past. My son and daughter are taking online right now. My daughter is in 9th grade. She's behind my son, who has an IEP for science and math, who's in 7th grade on Algebra 1. My 3 boys that went through public school in 8th grade had Algebra 1. So I'm learning, as a boot on the ground, my daughter did not learn the same material as her older brothers. So that's factual. But for people in West Virginia, there's your loophole. The second loophole, if you have the money, you can send your kids to private schools. They still have traditional math. We're also talking about science here. This state, many years ago, had science 1, 2, 3, 4. They integrated all the sciences. And they brought it back where they have chemistry, physics, biology. I'm a proud parent of a child who's taking senior level chemistry courses as being a sophomore at college right now. And that's the public school system. And all I am is upset that my last 2 kids can't graduate from a public school system as well as their brothers did and taking the traditional math courses. And I'm learning from you that we'll probably change the sciences back the way they were, where science 1, 2, 3, 4. It does not work.
Well,
Was there a question in there?
But I agree with the doctor saying.
Okay, folks, it's 8 o'clock. I hate to cut anybody off. We said we'd wrap up at 8 o'clock. I know that there's some questions and things that we have to do. So we can let her sit down and take a break before we have just some closing remarks. Let's give Dr. Sandra Stotsky a big round.